are watching and listening to Now Steaming. This is the podcast where we serve fresh hot takes from the millennial Chinoy perspective. My name is Stan C. And with me, as always, are my co-creators, collaborators. They're also the people behind So Asian Comics, Kimberly Mass and Cedric Cheng. How's it going, you two?
Hey Stan, what's up? It's finally episode 10. Am I right?
Yes, yes.
Episode
Man,
10.
Always a landmark, a milestone
Mm-hmm.
for every podcast. So I'm really happy that we made it this far, and I'm really happy that we get to have this conversation that we're having today because it's something that we already touched on back in episode 5,
Right.
but it's a different perspective naman. We're going back into the conversation about LGBTQIA plus with regard to the Chinoy community. And I've got a couple of friends who are, well, they are a couple, and they have very interesting insights and stories to share. So their names are Vincent Yu and Edmer Maguan. We're going to talk to them in a bit, but first we got to let our listeners know that the Chinoy TV documentary, which we're all a part of, Chinese by Blood, Filipino by Heart, is now airing on CNN Philippines. It started on August 8th at 8 p.m. and you can catch it every Sunday night on CNN Philippines, and on Monday you can catch it on demand on the Chinoy TV YouTube channel. People have already seen my teasers online, so I'm going to ask you two, Kim and Ced, really quickly. What can you tell our listeners and viewers about your part in the documentary?
Stan, do you want to
okay,
go first or do I
uh,
go first?
I can go
Maybe you
first.
go first. Yeah.
Basically, what I talked about in the documentary was how the title "Chinese by Blood, Filipino by Heart" came to be, because it was I took a deep dive into our lived experiences as Phil Chai, who's torn between two different communities, right? So I've always had this confusion with my identity or which groups do I belong in, but and yeah, so basically, my part in that documentary talks about my experiences as a Chinoy and I how I what you call that, and how I was able to combine both my identities from two different communities together.
All
So
right.
yeah,
How about you, Kim?
Yeah, just real quick. I think everyone was talking about identity in the documentary, but for me, what's different is I actually made a special mural. Well, not mural, more of an art piece for the whole documentary. So you guys can see the behind the scenes, how I painted it and how I conceptualized it. I also explained it in the documentary as well. So there, yeah, inviting you guys to catch it on CNN. Still ongoing, by the way.
Yeah, if you need more proof na kami mga talentadong Chinoy, there, the documentary is your
Yeah,
proof. All right,
right.
let's get to today's episode. Like I said, so psyched to bring on my friends Vincent, you and Edmer Maguan to the podcast. Vince, Ed, thank you for joining us here on Now Steaming. Teka, let's unmute you
Thanks,
guys.
Stan.
Glad to be here.
Sige, so for the people on video, they can see Vince and Ed. But can you guys introduce yourselves for the people listening on audio, just so they can be familiarized with your voices?
Sure. As Stan said, my name's Edmer Maguan. So I'm Filipino Chinese. I was born and raised in the Philippines. Spent most of my life surrounded by the Filipino Chinese community. Went to Filipino Chinese high school, and my whole K to 12 was Filipino Chinese, and then proceeded to go to UP, and then worked in the Philippines afterwards. And I did grad school in the US for the past 2 years.
Yep.
How about you,
Yeah,
Vince?
I basically like had the exact same experience as Ed. Minus a couple edits. Yeah, born and raised in the Philippines then. Tapos was born in Binondo actually.
Oh,
And
wow,
then
I didn't know that.
Oh.
I stayed there until I was 3 years old, and then moved to Mariposa Street, Cubao, Quezon City. And then from there I went to St. Jude. And
Uh-huh.
after a year in St. Jude, we moved right in front of Xavier. And that's where I was classmates with Stan from when I was 5 to when I was 18.
Yeah.
Little did I know that I would end up dating someone 3 batches below.
In
Because
Xavier
Ed's
din.
also in Xavier then. Or
Yeah.
nag-meet kami sa UP na. So after nun, I went to UP. And then, like worked in corporate. I was at Shell for a bit. Went to a consulting firm and then went to Stanford for business school overseas. And then Ed followed. And then now I'm back working in Spain, pero transferred to the San Francisco office. So generally like working for tech.
So just to set the table here, as Vince alluded to, we do go way back. We were batchmates in Xavier, classmates in college sa UP, and then we ended up working together at Teach for the Philippines back in 2013. So Vince and Ed have kind of been around my radar for quite some time because I'm also close friends with one of Edmer's brothers, and I also hosted yung mga wedding ng mga kapatid nila. So it really
Yeah.
paints a picture of
Nice.
how close knit yung communities namin. Vince and Ed have also done the Amazing Race Philippines back in 2014. So this really paints a picture of how long they've been in each other's lives, no? So just to probably set the tone for our conversation, how long have you guys been together as a couple?
So officially, we've been together for 7 years and how many months?
4?
And 4 months.
months.
So it's been a
Yeah.
while. Practically
Wow.
married.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. We technically, so even though we went to the same grade school and high school, we didn't actually meet until college.
Yeah,
Kasi nga,
because we're 3 years apart. So you don't, when you're a senior in high school, you don't really know who the freshmen in high
yeah,
school
we're
are.
too cool for them.
How'd you guys meet? Sa UP ba?
The UP. Kasi the thing about UP is not a lot of Xavierians go to UP. And so you generally know people from different classes, different like batches.
Yeah, like there were no other Xavierians in mass comm, like that college in UP. So I knew who Stan was immediately because he was Xavierian, even though he was 3 years older than me.
Yeah.
So
So yun.
what was
Like-
the story? Did you guys join an organization together? Did you meet at a party, at an event?
It's a funny question. This is because yeah, so I was a senior and then you were a freshman back
I was a
then, right?
sophomore, so you were like in your final quarter,
Yeah,
like the
yeah.
extended semester.
Yeah, my final quarter. And then Ed was hosting this or going around school through this and like propagating this program called Project Embrace.
Yeah, it was an event that we're trying to host it during Pride Month. Basically, it's like this photo shoot campaign where people would get their photo taken, change their profile picture to that photo, and would have a central
Yeah.
theme where
Yung mga-
you know embrace
Yung mga corny,
diversity.
the corny Facebook campaigns
Yeah,
Yeah.
when
of
we would-
circa 2013.
yeah.
People still do
And
that
then-
now. By the
Oh,
way.
ganyan pa rin.
May ganun pa rin,
You
guys.
just outgrew it.
Yeah.
And then I think one of the stops was I was in student council back then in the College of Business. That was one of the stops was the College of Business. And then
Mhm.
naturally like dadaan ako doon para tumambay. Tapos si Ed was there taking photos of random people. My best friend actually knew Ed. Remember
Mhm,
Joan?
mhm.
And then said like, oh yeah, like so Ed asked Joan I think to take a photo.
Mhm.
And then yun, sabi ko, wow, okay to ha. But unfortunately, both of us were taken back then. And so like that's when he wasn't on that's when you mentioned the word radar a while ago, Stan. So that's when Ed entered my radar. And then I think a couple years, would you say like a couple years? Like a year and a half
That
later,
would
roughly.
be a year. Yeah, maybe a year and a
Yeah,
half.
a year and a half later, we had both broken up at the same time. And then like, oh, and then we ran into each other in my college secretary's office. I was an
Okay.
alumna, pero dahil medyo bad yung heartbreak, I went back to UP kasi yun yung safe space ko.
Uh-huh.
And then wala, natatambay ako doon. I was fortunate enough to like be able to work, not in the office. And so yun. And then si Ed entered the room. I flirted.
So he was the way his version
No.
his version of flirting is
Oh, this is fun.
because I actually didn't. So at that time, I didn't know that Vince was gay because he wasn't actually
Uh-huh.
out then.
Okay.
So he was there, and I knew of him because, as you mentioned earlier, people from our high school generally have a gauge if you're from the same high school.
And Vince was an
and-
achiever. He was everywhere.
Yes, and yeah, he had already graduated then, so he was the valedictorian of UP that year. So his face was in articles, people were sharing it as usual, and then so I knew who he was, and then but I was there to get, I was doing some work for my org, and I was just given some bad news from the school admin. So I was
Oh my
rushing out,
god.
and when I was rushing out, he was like, "Oh, you're Edric's brother, right? Edric's my brother who Stan's very good friends with." And he was like, "Oh, you also went to the same high school. Can you read this speech I'm going to deliver in our high school because they're going to give me an award or something?"
Did I say that?
What a
I,
flex! Oh my
oh
god!
god, I did not say we were gonna give an
and
award.
then and then I have creative liberty. And then I look at the lap, and then I was rushing out because I was panicking, but I didn't want to ignore a person. So typically,
True.
people don't really do
Yeah.
that. So I just looked into the laptop. It was the Microsoft Word file. So it wrote 2 pages because it was a speech. But then after looking at it for 5 seconds, I was like, "Looks good.
Yeah.
I gotta go."
Wait,
And
you
then
missed one key detail,
oh,
which was
he mentioned that he
it was
mentioned that what inspired him to write that speech in our high school to receive an award was that he had broken up recently with his ex-boyfriend.
yeah.
No connection.
So-
He just
No
wants
connection, but
Hint,
I just
hint,
wanted to
hint.
plug it in there.
Yeah,
Kasi
subtle
matagal ko nang,
hints.
exactly. Kasi matagal ko nang crush si Ed.
Yeah.
And then parang, alam mo yun, parang like, oh my God, pagkakataon ko na to. And I remember, I don't know if you know her, Stan, but I was there with Don Rivera.
Yeah, yeah, I know her.
I and then parang I was telling Ton when as soon as Ed entered the room, parang like, oh my God, is this a sign? And so hindi ko na alam yung sasabihin ko. So kung ano, I knew that the information I had to convey was the commonality of having Ed's brother, as a common point of contact. And then second was the fact that I was gay because I was out to select people, but I wasn't fully out at that time. And so kung ano lang yung sinabi ko. And I guess I slightly flexed. Pero anyway, I was really truly writing a speech for Savior back then.
It's
I'm
interesting
single,
how
by the way.
Yeah, you're very
Yeah.
strategic about it. Yeah, we're on the same team, and I'm single, by the way. Hint, hint,
Yeah,
nudge, nudge.
yeah.
So, was it
Oh,
easy
oh,
from there? Nah, you just started going out na after that, or did it take a while?
Not immediately. So I left the room. I was panicking, so it didn't even cross my mind what he was trying to do. But when I left the room, that's when I realized that, wait, why did he mention he just broke up with his boyfriend? Like for the speech, there's no connection. I realized he's
Yeah.
probably flirting. And I say not immediately because at that time I was still in a relationship, so I did it. You can't really. I guess you can't really date two people at once. But in my head then was like, oh, I didn't want it to seem like naman I'm, burning a bridge by being rude or anything. So I messaged him on Facebook.
Oh my God.
I messaged him on Facebook na parang, oh, I'm sorry if it seems
It was
very
it was
rude."
3-paragraph first ever message on Facebook.
I think that's an exaggeration.
But no, like that's true because we only got together like 5 months later, and
Yeah, okay.
a lot of that was because he was still dating someone else, and neither of us wanted like them to break up. So we didn't really talk for like 4 months, and then when I found out that he and the ex-boyfriend had broken up, that was when I truly like started messaging him.
Okay.
It was
Vince,
like texting for 2 weeks.
Vince, you
And then we
mentioned that
did a
you were
date.
only out palang to select people. So I'll go to Ed muna. We'll get into your side of it later on. With
Yeah.
you, Ed, were you out na ba to your family and to your friends and to basically everybody that you knew?
So I came out after high school, like the summer between high school and first year of undergrad in the Philippines. And the way I really thought about it was throughout my senior year in high school, it was already in my head. Like I was already like itching to come out. I also had a batchmate then who came out during our fourth year, which was I would say very rare. Like I think at least in that time, it was rare that people would come out. So the fact that someone had already come out just made me feel much safer that I could have done it back then. But it's always something that's very hard to do. And I think I just felt safer doing it once high school was 100% behind me. And regardless of, in your head, the worst things happen when you're gonna come out. Like your worst nightmare is the possibility when in fact, most of the time, if you're lucky enough that it actually turns out much better. And which for my case, I was very lucky. It turned out to be a very positive experience. So I was out. I did come out between high school and undergrad. I never did. I never came out. I never had like a specific conversation with my family, like, oh, I'm gay, and but I think anyone in my life would know that I was gay. And I guess in terms of my family, it's more like not having that conversation, but there being an understanding. I think it's also kind of, I don't know if many people can relate, but like it's hard to have those like weird, emotional, very like conversations with your Chinese parents. So
Yeah.
kind of just like, but both know, but like not really name it.
How do they respond though? Like sabi mo na it was kind of known but never really spoken about. So siguro when the fact was cemented na yeah, you are gay, how do they respond?
Not, I didn't really feel anything changed. And honestly, because like I mentioned, Stan, like because we've never had that conversation. Sometimes even in my head, there's like 1%, like what if they actually don't know? And then for sometime later on, something comes out that's like, wait, you didn't know? But it's like, just to paint a picture of how obvious it should be, is that my mom is like my friend on social media, and then I post about me and Vince as a couple and everything. And like Vince, they invite Vince to like dinners, like if we're gonna have family dinner, I was like, oh, is Vince coming? Everything like that. So I mean, at this point, it would be a surprise for anyone in the world if they didn't know. So I think that's just this like weird space I'm trying to thread. It's like, and there's always my fear. It's like, what is that 1% or less than 1% that they actually don't know? It's like, what was this whole past 7 years? It was pretty funny. Yeah.
Oh man.
Did you meet any opposition or parang backlash after you'd come out? Kasi 'di ba it's really part of who you are. It's part of your identity. Like as you mentioned na if I'm connected to you on Facebook, lalabas at lalabas 'yan. So
Mhm.
did anybody give you any flack for it?
I've been very lucky. I've never had to deal with my being gay as a in one part a disadvantage, or in another way, or at least a disadvantage that I was aware of, or in another way it's like any form of discrimination from anyone in my life or even strangers. I think when I came out, I was expecting probably the worst from people from high school, and that was not the case. I got, even from people I wouldn't expect, but I got very like supportive messages, even for people who didn't really understand it as much, but they were trying to say they were supportive in the ways they knew how. And I guess it's a different story for me and why I don't feel as close to my high school friends. And I think it's not because I felt any form of pushback, but I think it was more because I felt like I was acting like a different person in high school. And once I had kind of like reinvent myself or fully came out, it wasn't like people didn't try to include me, but it was more like it just felt weird for me to hang out with people who I was acting differently around just
Right.
years ago.
Yeah.
So it kind of created that distance. So I felt very grateful that everyone was very supportive, but I just couldn't bring myself to, it was just weird for me to, you know, put myself back in that situation. So I just like took myself away from that situation.
No,
Yeah.
it totally makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was actually about to ask Ed, like, how was it like in school? Like, I mean, I think Xavier, well, from what I know from my brother, they don't really talk about they don't really talk about the LGBTQ as much, right? So, parang I'm just really curious, like, what was it like in high school for you?
Yeah, I guess it's all gonna come off as like I was very lucky because obviously, yeah, definitely people in my class would be bullied if they were thought to be
Yeah.
gay or LGBT. And somehow I never got bullied throughout my experience in high school. I don't know if it's just because
Because you were cool.
I wouldn't say I was cool.
That's what you said.
I wouldn't say I was cool, but
Nilaglag eh.
You
but
mentioned sabihin mo
no,
na.
I wouldn't say I was cool. But I think like I don't know if it was a layer of, I don't know how I managed to get some level of status that people would not bully you. Like, and it's hard to tell, right? Like when you're in high school, you don't know. Like if you're bullied, there is no good reason for you being bullied.
Yeah.
No, there, and if you're not bullied, then there's probably no very good reason either. It's just like someone just one day decided that you were not gonna get bullied, and then you're not bullied throughout your high school life, right? It's not like people do things that makes them deserve to get bullied. So I'm just gonna say like it was very lucky for me, and I was very grateful that I would say I had classmates and batchmates in my year who were somehow open-minded for what the time was. I would, yeah.
And I think like my from my understanding, it was also because you found confidence in yourself, and so people couldn't break through that, if that made sense.
Hmm.
Like in high school, would you
Yeah.
say that?
Maybe. Like
Kasi,
I was
kasi his
very
first honor, he was like president of 8 clubs or something like
no,
that.
that's an exaggeration. But I mean, I was a very active
He's
student.
president of
Yeah.
three
I was
clubs
a
or
very
something
active
like
person
that.
in school.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I don't know if that's true. I can't
Or
remember.
part of 8 clubs. Is that right?
I don't know. I don't want to say
Super
something and then
achiever.
someone's gonna be like,
No,
you
no
weren't.
one, no one. You can just
Who
like you
remembers
just
high
put a
school?
tilde beside the number. Like, it's like
I mean,
roughly that.
if anybody has a problem, they can hit us up at Now Steaming Podcast at gmail.com. We will
This is how
protect
many
Vince
clubs
and
I had.
Ed. We will filter the
Yeah.
emails. Ganon. Okay,
No,
let's go
but
to Vince. Sorry, Ed. You were saying something?
no, I was just gonna wrap it up by saying like, yeah, he was. My guess was that he found confidence in like who he was in high school, and like people who generally know who they were and had a good circle of friends around them. You kind of are less touchable to
Okay.
bullies, if that makes
Yeah, yeah.
sense.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So yeah, let's go to you, Vince, and let's talk about your story. Did you have the same experiences as Ed, as with regard to coming out and being confident about your identity, your sexuality, especially coming from the same environment? Xavier being an all-boys school, Chinese Catholic, sometimes misogynistic, type of environment.
Yeah, so I'd say I don't know. Ngayon ko lang na-realize na medyo different talaga yung experiences namin yung
Mhm.
in coming out. I think I faced a bit more adversity throughout. I only came out fully once I was out of college. And then most of my coming out process was actually while I was in college. And then while I was in high school, I knew that in some form I knew that I like guys, but I didn't fully accept it until I had my first boyfriend when I was in college. But in high school I was also bullied. But for the reason of like, I think people were calling me queer because I really like the show Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. And as someone who speaks his mind a lot, I would tell everyone that I liked it and I would defend liking it. And so people started calling me queer, which I thought was okay because it was a word I learned in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But then, yeah, I think starting second year and between second and third year, I was actually pretty bullied. Because people called me queer despite thinking that I wasn't gay. But what's funny is like I actually turned out gay. I didn't realize that. I didn't know it back then.
Yeah. How about sa bahay, sa family? Like, did they know na that you like guys, and what was that coming out process like for you and your family?
So for me and the family, it was really hard. The only person I came out to in my own terms was actually my mom. When I was dating my second boyfriend, I think I was 20 or 21. That was around the time that How I Met Your Mother was like was a thing, right? And then they made this concept of intervention banners.
Yes.
I don't know if you
Yeah.
remember those episodes.
Yeah.
I felt like I had one of those. Basically, what happened was, when you're in love and over the moon, which I was with my second boyfriend back then, you alam mo yung nag-Skype kayo until like 4 a.m. or something like that. And then usually naman I'm not up until 4 a.m. So yung mga kapatid ko nagtataka, di ba? And then one of my sisters actually snooped on my laptop and then read the chats. And then through that found out that I was gay.
Oof. How did that make you feel?
Oh, like horrible, right? But actually I was gonna get to the actual intervention. When that same night, my ex-boyfriend, who's actually a singer, I invited him over kasi kasal nung sati ko. And we were doing a song. My CT and I were doing a song number. So I'm the youngest of five. I have four older sisters. And then I was getting my then boyfriend to teach us how to sing. Or syempre, my siblings thought he was a friend. But at that time, alam na ng mga kapatid ko na kami. And so pag alis niya, pagbalik ko sa bahay, three of my sisters were actually there standing up, ready to confront me about being gay.
Oh God.
And that was like really horrible. Kasi parang, syempre, di pa ako ready. And then I don't really recall the details because it's like one of those things that you just block out because it
Yeah.
was such a harrowing experience.
Mhm.
And then when was that? Like that was probably that's 10 years ago, I would say. No, 9 or 8 years ago. And they've really come around. Like a lot of them like Ed. They're not best friends with Ed, right? Like they don't message with Ed on Messenger or something like that. But they like his photos and they like our photos randomly sometimes. And so that's a lot of progress because where they started from was like they were reading Bible verses out to me that night. And then sometimes after I would get out of a college classroom, I would open my phone and see, you know how like text messages before, hindi pa ako iPhone nun. So like,
Yeah.
alam mo may character limit yung mga text message. Like there would be
Continued.
yeah, there would be continuous text messages, like
Mhm.
maybe 3 or 4 of them, all about like, how I should consider dating women or something like that. To which I would respond, okay, AY, period. Just so they would stop. And it was like that for a while. But eventually they came around.
You say na they came around eventually. Did you what was the process of trying to guide them through, I guess, being more sensitive towards you, towards your experience, because the way that they confronted you, or even the idea of praying the gay away, is very people would call that offensive, diba? So how did you guide them through that process?
I didn't actually do anything. It was so after we had that night, for two whole years we didn't utter a single word about it in the dinner table. Never ko pinag-usapan. So we pretended like it didn't exist, but sometimes I would see these text messages. And then after 2 years, when I broke up with my ex-boyfriend, the singer guy, that's what actually when, because my form of catharsis with these things is like I just talk to a lot of friends and a lot of people, and when I run out of friends and people to talk to, I talk to who else is around, my mom, my family members, and that's why I told my mom, to the point I made a while ago, and then I also told a couple of my sisters na parang like, oh my God, heartbreak, dot, dot, dot. And then they had some advice to give. And that was actually the first time we talked about it. And then when I started dating Ed, and then we were suddenly on national TV together, parang obviously my sisters suspected and eventually put two and two together and realized we were dating. And then I think actually naging factor na Ed's from a good Chinese family. and that's the reason why there's
Okay.
like partial to Ed for some reason.
Yeah.
And then yeah, that's how it was.
Some of the rules still apply.
Honestly, the
Yeah.
rules, it's so weird. Like it seems that I do know of some examples na the Great Wall takes precedence to, having a vagina.
I'm so glad you made that joke and neither of us did.
Specifically the vagina, because I still have my man boobs.
Okay, so how did you introduce Ed to your family? Sorry, Ed, I will stick with Vince's side
Yeah,
muna.
go for it.
How did you introduce Ed to your family, and how did they take to Ed? Because I remember when I hosted one of your sister's weddings, you brought me over to your house to meet with your family, and then you were like, "Oh, Stan, don't mention Ed, no references to him whatsoever." I'm like, "Okay, cool." You're the client, so how did you introduce Ed? Kung ganon.
I think the first time you met my parents was when we were already contestants on the race, and then like you would visit home. But I actually never formally introduced Ed in the capacity of being my partner.
Because they already knew, and then
because they already kind of knew. And so up to now, it's actually the thing that parang we only talk about when I bring it up.
Okay.
And to this day, like there is a sense of discomfort from their end to bring it up. They're like, I think I have four older sisters, and all four of them have made like varying degrees of comfort. Like two of them are like super cool with it, right? And I would trust that if we do get once we do get married here in the US, they'd fly in and attend the wedding. Um, a couple of them like I'm not super sure about, and so yeah, I think what's influencing that is partially the degree of openness of their respective partners, because all my sisters are married, and then some of them like TV more than the others, and so like media's full of gay things right now. I learned a lot from Glee and Modern Family, for example, and there are versions of that in the succeeding generations. And I think my the two so the two of my sisters who like TV more and have like more open-minded, well-read partners are actually the ones that are more open to it, and the other
Interesting.
two are more like slightly on the more religious conservative side.
Right. How about your
Um,
parents? I noticed na you didn't really mention yung reaction nila, or I mean, I guess you talked about your mom a bit, but like, where do they stand now?
oh, so my mom's like, so I when as soon as when I came out to my mom, this was when before I started dating Ed, after I broke up with my ex-boyfriend. She actually cried the first time she heard, and then she was okay with it 10 seconds after. And so that was actually really amazing because it's the first time that I came out to a family member on my own terms and it actually turned out okay. Granted, like she's not ecstatic about it and we don't talk about it very often. Pero nung huling visit ko sa Manila, nung sinabi ko na like, yeah, like Ed and I plan to get married and have kids. And she's like, oh, really? Okay. Like I didn't know that. So she's generally like supportive. Um, and then my dad naman, I actually have not come out to my dad. Uh, Even though the whole universe knows that I'm out, I kind of think he's partially in denial. But I will tell him the next time we see each other
What do you have to say to him if he's watching this video?
that I'm gay. And I'm glad I don't have to tell you anymore.
Surprise.
Pero minsan kasi
Breaking
weird
news, no?
kasi. Yeah, minsan weird kasi alam mo yung may mga times na may sinasabi siya na, oh, my girlfriend ka na ba dyan? Parang, Dad, you look at my Instagram stories and you look at my Facebook feed and you look at my Facebook stories and I'm with the same person in every single photo. Like, ano ba? Tapos yung mga comment ng mga tao, best couple ever. Ganyan. Parang di mo alam. Like, I'm sure he knows and I'm sure, and I'm Facebook friends slash friends with a lot of his kids, a lot of his like Barkada's friends, diba? And I'm sure na the news will find its way to him through them. So parang pretty sure he knows, but it's kind of the thing na it's kind of like the very Phil Chai thing that you don't really talk about
Yeah.
Right,
these
right.
things.
I'm
Yeah.
glad you mentioned yung culture natin as Chinoys kasi very important sa atin, 'di ba, yung saving face and putting up that front na we are the model family. Like Vince, Ed, you're both achievers. Vince, you're like valedictorian. Ed, you're joining all these orgs and you're very successful in your extracurriculars and in inside the classroom and all that. So, how did like was there any pressure to like not expose that part of yourselves to your family's friends or their paano ba, their connections because you had to put up that front na we are a model family? Was that ever something that you thought about?
Um, Good question. On my end, naman, I think I do acknowledge, Sandra, you're saying that the Filipino Chinese community has this very, very save face culture and everything like that. But I felt like actually my parents growing up have been very averse to that. Not in the sense like they actually they actively try to look bad in front of people, but more just like they actually don't like to subscribe to that idea that, oh, we have to pretend to be something we're not. And it's not specific to my sexuality, but it's more just like, I think in many ways in the Chinese Filipino community, it's a lot like pretending like you're well off, or pretending like your kids have so many like awards or much better than they actually are. Like my
Yeah.
parents have never put an active effort into thinking about that. They've been very laid back. I don't think they, and I think because they were that way, and I guess just reflecting now, I guess maybe that rubbed off on me in some way. That's like, yeah, I never, I guess I had a very certain, like Vince was mentioning earlier, like having a certain level of confidence in high school and carrying that till undergrad. Like started working in the Philippines, probably carried that to like, I it would be a lie for me to say that I've never really cared what people think. I still do, but maybe to the level like baka it got decreased a bit because my parents showed me that you don't have to act a certain way for other people, even though we were part of this community. So I think
Yeah.
now thinking about that, it's I think that's a pretty cool thing for them to try to uphold and and
Yeah.
getting to see that from them.
And I guess like it's worth mentioning na parang Ed's mom actually is from Hong Kong. Like is first generation in the Philippines from Hong Kong. So maybe that was partially you can attribute partially the difference of culture in through that. And the dad went to UP. So med woke.
Oh, okay, okay.
Oh,
That's
I
cool.
like
That's
it.
cool.
How about you,
Okay.
Vince? Kasi yun nga, 'di ba, when you went to college, you really established yourself as one of the achievers of the entire university, and you were a summa cum laude valedictorian, all of that jazz. So, did it feel like your accomplishments were diminished for your parents because, or for your family because you were gay? Parang was that ever like something that to make them less proud of you or something?
So I don't think we've ever had a conversation that linked those two things. What I can say right now is, or what I can definitively say right now is, at this stage in life, when we both have really good jobs, like in another country, we're both Stanford graduates na. Parang I think the mental calculus for my sisters is it's okay that he's gay because he's these other things too, right? In an ideal world, it's okay that he's gay, period. But I feel like the mental calculus for some people who some people who have gay friends or gay relatives that have, quote unquote redeeming qualities is like offset siya. And I guess that's not to me that's not ideal, but at least at least at least like sometime at least they don't hate at least they're not 100% ashamed of me or something like that. Yeah.
Can we dig deeper into the bit you mentioned about redeeming qualities? For
Yeah.
both of you, Vince and Ed, like what are your insights on that? Yung parang yeah, he's gay, but dot 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 at least dot dot dot. So, what can you say about that perspective?
My thoughts on that is it's terrible. Like I think we don't, as gay people, whether part of the Chinese community or not, you don't owe anyone else anything for being gay. What you are is what you are, and no one should have to look for any other redeeming qualities because of that. And I think it's such a toxic culture for people, for that phrase in itself is such a toxic culture that, oh, he's gay but ganito.
Yeah.
I think it has led to, I don't know if you noticed this, but I think I've also noticed that it seems to be a lot of people who, there's a disproportionate amount of LGBTQ people who generally do better in school, do better in their careers and everything. And I think it's because of this type of perception, that because they grew up needing to feel like they needed to make up for something or draw attention to something else that wasn't their sexuality. And in some ways you can think about it like, oh, then is that a good thing because it motivated them? But I think at the end of the day, there's no making up for whatever mental toll that would have taken on these people. But I think Vince is sharing it from a very personal perspective. That's like, the individual lived experience is the reason people do it is, for survival. It's like you want to
Yeah.
be accepted.
And I guess like to me, I don't work hard because I'm gay. To be very clear, I work hard because I want to succeed and I like doing well, and it's fun to win things, diba?
Yeah.
But but yeah, I guess it's a byproduct of that lang. Na parang by some of my relatives do make this mental calculus of like, oh, okay lang na ganyan siya. Okay lang na he's gay because he's these other things naman. And it's kind of messed up. It's messed up. It's convenient for me. I acknowledge that. But like, people shouldn't, or queer people shouldn't have to prove themselves in other ways to be accepted for who they are. Yeah.
As achievers, having grown up and being conditioned by yung culture natin, di ba, our Chinese Filipino community na you have to keep succeeding and all that, do you feel like yung success ninyo from being students and now to being professionals to being people in the tech industry in the US, no less, do you feel like you have to keep validating yourself because of your sexuality and because of where you come from?
You wanna go first?
I think not really. Not anymore, I think would be my answer to that. Parang, and this is, I guess, partially detached from me being gay. I think the other aspect of my identity is that I have been an insecure overachiever for the past like 13 years of my life, starting college, aka when I reinvented myself from being a line of 7 student in high school to being valedictorian of UP. That was like a huge, no, that was a huge leap, man. Like not doing your homework to like really studying your ass off in college. That was hard work. I think I think because of the aspect now of my personality, you know, like I'm just so tired of trying so hard. I'm now kind of done. I'm just like spent. I'm like happy. We're happy where we are. Or at least I'm happy where I am. And then second is because our environment right now in the US is actually really accepting. I feel like our being Asian here is actually the part of our identity that's being in like the San Francisco Bay Area. We feel that being Asian here is more is the part of our identity that's more threatened than actually being gay, because being in a same-sex relationship and being queer in the Bay Area is, you know, it is like you're just like every other person basically.
Yeah.
And you're just very well loved, and it's so widely accepted. And so because we are privileged enough to be in this environment, nagiging less of a top of mind concern yung parang we need to do these things because of X, Y, and Z. Not that that
Right.
was ever a thing for me. Yeah.
Can we dig
Yeah.
into the anti-Asian sentiment that you guys touched on? Kasi you guys live in the States, diba? And we're living in a time na with the pandemic being associated with anti-Asian sentiment. How does that affect you guys directly and individually? And what insights have you taken from this very weird time?
Yeah. I would say though, when Vince was sharing it earlier, I think even pre, hashtag stop API hate period, you could really feel it in many ways, not in terms of like maybe back then not physical danger, but you always felt yourself not as seen in a room, which is pretty common for I would say Asian minorities here in the US with our counterparts of different races, that we're usually the model minority, more quiet minority, hardworking, but doesn't tend to speak up as much. So you're seen less, and in a whether it's the work environment or the business school environment, it's in many ways disadvantageous. And I think there's a lot of these are things that we came from a very homogenous society in the Philippines where we're all Asian, and the biggest variance is that you're Filipino or you're Chinese, and there are
Yeah.
lots of people who are Chinese Filipino. But here, it's culturally it's very different, race wise everyone's very different, and I think just learning and getting over the hurdle of that, being Asian and the stereotypes attached to being Asian, was a really big challenge coming here initially. And moving on to the stop API hate period, I won't lie that there are times that I'm walking the street and I'm just worried that someone's gonna attack me, and it's mainly because I feed myself with all these headlines that actually do happen around the country, and I do know statistically that the chances of me being attacked because I'm Asian, is still, it's still low because it's not like it's happening to every other person, but at the same time, these are the fears attached to it and attached to being Asian here
Yeah.
during this time.
And I think there are a multitude of studies that show that being Asian actually makes you an easier target. Like there is a disproportionate amount of criminal acts targeted towards Asians. And so like for me, that staggering statistic makes me more scared than usual when I do walk around in the city, especially in like not so great parts of the city. Parang palpable talaga siya, especially sabi nga ni Ed when all this news came out. Yeah.
I want to take it back to yung experiences ninyo growing up here as Chinoys and then you coming to terms with your sexuality. Kasi growing up in Xavier, di ba, all-boys school, and then more often than not, there's also a lot of ingrained misogyny, di ba? There's a lot of homophobic slurs that are casually thrown around willy-nilly. Did you guys ever feel like you had like a role model that you could look towards? Did you ever see a face that resembled yours who was also in that space of being LGBTQ na parang, okay, I can identify with this person, whether it's in media or somebody from the general community natin mga Chinoy? Was that option ever available to you guys?
Go ahead.
I think locally, definitely not. Like within the community, I don't think there was anyone I really looked up to who I felt like who served as a model. I really retreated to television back then, and mainly US television series that in the mid 2000s. I remember in fifth grade, I would just immerse myself in watching shows like The OC, One Tree Hill, like all these shows, Desperate Housewives, Grey's Anatomy, and watching all this media. And this was a time, at least in the US, that the wave was coming. The LGBT movement was really strong during this time, and seeing how it was, how even these simple ideas were being introduced into mainstream media in the US really gave me some sense of comfort that even if the society I was living in at this moment was, like you mentioned, Stan, very misogynistic. You'd go to school every day and hearing these words, you just try to tune them out, pretend it's cool. But seeing these things, I guess, in the media back then helped because in some ways I knew that the Philippines will always follow, like later on, like especially that time, like the Philippines always follows the US. At some point we'll get there, and granted it's taking much longer. But I guess I was in my head, that was the comfort I was feeling, and I retreated to a lot of reading online forums where people would talk about these things, and I would educate myself even then. And I think that's where I also built, Vince talked and I talked about a bit the confidence I was able to build since a young age with regard to my sexuality. But reading online and hearing like, there's this whole community out there who is very supportive, and allowing myself to educate myself, like, yeah, I'm not, like, there's nothing wrong with me, there's nothing wrong with who I am. And seeing all these successes around the world with regards to this movement helped me build some sort of confidence even from a young age.
Yeah, right. So I'm just curious also, like, was it a factor for you guys to move to the US because they're more open to like the LGBTQ? Like, because I have a thesis mate back in college, and she's in the well, he's in the process of transitioning right now. So he's really happy where he is because he mentioned that here in the Philippines, it's so difficult to be open, to be himself, and there he's just totally free to be whatever he wants. So was it a factor ba na you guys moved to the US because it's more open there?
Oh, for sure. That was so we both used business schools to get here. But yeah, like I think business school was always part of my plan, but it also became part of Ed's plan because we wanted to use that as a ticket to move to the US because we knew it was a country where we could get married and have kids. Prior to business school, I was working in Singapore. He was in Manila, and neither of those places were very open to, same-sex relationships, that queer people. And so yeah, it was definitely a factor, but it was a hard decision to make on our end because at that time, we were pretty active in the queer rights movement. We were helping set up LGBTQ plus affinity groups in our workplaces and stuff like that. You were helping with the Metro Manila Pride March. So parang tumulong tayo ng konti, tapos alis na tayo. So nakaka-guilty rin. But at the end of the day, we chose to have the life we want. Or we are choosing to have the life we want, at least for the next couple decades, because we do want kids. We do want to raise them in a safe environment. We can't imagine raising our kids in Southeast Asia.
No, yeah.
And then maybe eventually, in a couple of decades, when the climate's much better, we go back, and then that's when we render help. But who knows? I could be saying this now, but I never go back, right? So easy to say things.
Yeah, totally understandable, diba? Like, why go back to this shithole when you're already there?
Yeah.
That's fair.
Vince, balik lang ako sa'yo ng konti because I don't think you got to answer the question about role models from the Chinoy community. Like, did you have any anyone to aspire to be, given na yung identity mo, you were still trying to figure it out growing up?
Within the Chinoy community, like really nothing, right? Like sometimes, I don't know if any of you can relate, but like sometimes you'd have disappearing uncles or disappearing aunties na mawala na lang sa ibang bansa, and then you secretly find out na parang they fled the family because they were gay or like lesbians. I know of a lot of people who have uncles and aunts that are like that.
Is it us now?
No, we're out. But yeah, like I did not have anyone to look up to. And then growing up, diba, parang you would always go through there in your, you'd have always these like extended like parties with your extended Chinese families of like, oh, this is Taima's 90 somethingth birthday. And then parang everyone would prepare a dance number. And that's when the larger family you get together, and there are like 3 or 4 of those things every year. And in those events you meet up with your uncles and your aunts, and then they'll always ask like, oh, may howe ka na ba, or something like that. Or like, and then but also like apart from those typical conversations about your weight, about whether you have a partner, diba? There's always that like, or baka baklaya, no ganun. Like there would always be those types of jokes that would be scathing. And so I just kept growing up with that every event I went to, which is really why I found those events to be very toxic, and I still try to avoid them to this day. Especially kasi maraming Duterte supporter.
Man, don't.
Man.
Oh man.
And then so there's not only one reason, but at least now, like, you know, when I do go to those events and when I do hear those things, pagkasama ko yung mga nephews and nieces ko, right after I take them aside and I explain to them like, nope, that is not okay what that person said because of X, Y, and Z. And whoever a person is, you should be kind to them. You should treat them like they're equals. Parang ganun. And so yeah, the answer to your question, Stan, is no. And then I also realized na within the sphere of business, parang wala rin. And so actually in business school essay goes all about that, kind of like growing up, like wanting to be in business, not really having that role model. Like, why can't that person be eventually me?
Yeah, that could be you, diba? I would say na, or hopefully through a podcast like this, both of you can be those role models for other Chinoys in the same spheres that you guys move around, diba? So, siguro as we wind down here, I want to ask about what your thoughts are on the Chinese Filipino community and being LGBTQIA+. Like, is it easier to be part of that community now, or nothing much has changed? Like, from your insights, given you went through it and you've been in the States for a couple of years, what are your thoughts?
I don't know if it's easier now.
Or maybe we just met the right people. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't have a sense of how, I guess the prime age would really be like in your teen years now. It's when you're really thinking about your sexuality and all of that. I don't know if it's easier for people these days. I would like to think society has moved forward in many ways, and hopefully nasama yung Filipino-Chinese community. So, unfortunately, I don't really know anyone who's going through something like that at this moment. I think overall the climate is still pretty tough. whether you're Chinese Filipino or not, especially in a very both religious and right now having a very um, toxic, patriarchal, misogynistic um, thing
Yeah.
in the Philippines. Yeah.
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 Oh man.
What do you think?
I would actually say like it's definitely better than when we were growing up. Like, and I only have a couple of anecdotes. But one of them is I was catching up with my high school English teacher, our high school English teacher in Japan. Nagkikita kami randomly. And then kinuwento niya na before he actually left Xavier, he the student council president of Xavier would actually have moments where he would call out people for being homophobic, for making homophobic comments in class. And so that stuff is now happening. Whereas before that was unthinkable.
Right.
Right? And second is parang I look at and I'm not sure if this is a function of like my friend circle being selective, being like very well picked. Pero parang isip ko na pa, I look at the aunts and aunties that I had growing up and that were the parents of my fellow Syrians as I was growing up. And then parang pag kinumpara ko sila dun sa mga, mga batchmates natin na nagkakaanak recently, like these people are just way more accepting and tolerant as individuals. And while they may not be like super gung ho about the LGBTQ community, QIA plus community, parang they're at least marginally better than the generation before us. I think that's partially because of media, right? I think that plays a huge factor. Partially because there's probably an increase in role models across different spheres. In general, religion is losing its grip. I think that's partially the reason then. So there are many factors, but I do think it's getting better. The question is it getting better fast enough, right? Is it getting better for me? Is it getting better fast enough for me and Ed to decide to move back to the Philippines in 10 years and know that our kids are going to be safe there? I don't think so. But am I optimistic about, 2 generations from now, a couple like us being able to stay and actually have a family in the Philippines? I think that's within the realm of possibility.
All right. I appreciate yung insights ninyo, and I think I can speak for Kim and said as well. When I say that it's always refreshing to have these conversations, and I want to thank you guys for your openness and for being candid enough to just share these things with us. It really means a lot to us, to me specifically, since I've known you guys for a long time.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Ed. Thanks,
Yeah,
Kim.
this is great. Keep doing this.
I also want to say congratulations, by the way, to you guys making lives and careers and a home for yourselves in the US. It's daunting whether or not you're gay, whether or not you're Chinoy, but just because of the fact that you're Filipino, the fact that you are there and that you're successful, it's amazing to see. So congratulations to you guys. Hell, congratulations, Ed, for being on TV with Tyra Banks and working with her. That's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah,
Badass.
it's a lot of fun.
We wish you nothing but all the success and all the love and all the happiness in your lives. So, Vince, Ed, thank you so much for being part of this episode of Now Steaming.
Thanks.
Thank you.
On that note, we got to let our listeners know that if you want to be part of these conversations, you can do that. You can actually email us. We have a mailbag. It's at nowsteamingpodcast@gmail.com. If you have any stories that you want to share, any comments about the episodes you've heard or seen, anything, any insights you want to add, any debates you want to start, you can shoot us an email right over there. If you have comments about the Chinoy TV documentary, though, you can send that to them, not us. We just appeared in it.
Yeah.
We did not produce it. But for all of the individual comments that we've been getting, we appreciate that as well. Said, where can people find you?
Oh, you guys can reach me on Instagram, Cedric C. Cheng, or you can just message the Now Steaming Instagram or Facebook page because I'm the one who's handling the inbox. What about you, Kim?
Yeah, nice. Yeah, Sed's our social media guy here. So, yeah, really enjoyed this episode, guys. It's so fun listening to you guys like talk about everything because it's so different from my perspective. You know, I have no idea what's going on in like it's all based through my brother's story. So, yeah, really refreshing. So, thank you for being here, guys. And if you guys want to reach out to me, you want to talk about topics like these, or most of the time, you know, I find people messaging me. These are only like either my close friends. I do get some messages from people.
From
I'm not.
guys.
And friend requests.
Well, no,
I
no, no,
wonder
no.
why.
Question mark. But yeah, if you guys want to do a collab, or if you have any particular topics that you want us to discuss, you know, feel free to let us know. You can reach out to me. That's at Kimberly Mass. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I also have a personal website. So if you guys want to check out what else I'm doing in life, just visit www.kimberlymass.com. You can just read my bio there. Yun.
And as for me, if you want to check out the stuff I do for radio, TV, podcasting, or if you just want to talk wrestling, hit me up at underscore Stansy. That's underscore STANSY on Twitter and on Instagram. That's it for this episode of Now Steaming. Thank you again to our guests, Vincent, you, and Edmer Maguan. Really appreciate you guys calling in from the Bay. Thank you as well to my collaborators, Cedric Cheng and Kimberly Mass. My name is Stansy, and as we get out of here, remind you once again to please stay safe. Mask up, stay home unless you absolutely have to go out, and please get your vaccines. And don't forget to vote by 2022. Parang awa nyo na please. We need a
Please.
change.
Please.
We're out of
Please.
here. Bye-bye.
Bye.